Thank you, John. And it's been, I think, 35 years plus. I've been at this since 1977, doing this full time. It's unfortunate that there are not more Catholic priests doing this full time. Obviously, one priest doing it like this is not enough. However, it's up to the rest of us, as I said yesterday, all of us, to get the message out there. We're in times like the time before when Our Lady appeared at Fatima. The Freemasons had killed the king and exiled the Cardinal Patriarch and had imprisoned lots of religious and priests. And the priests that were left and those who had parishes, churches still open, were afraid to speak up. I expect that's something like we are today, although they don't realize it's the Masons that are put in that position. And of course, when Robert talks about the Zionists, there's a connection which Father Kramer will give for you between the Zionists and the Masons, and then both of those errors, by the way, are errors of Russia. I still remember this poor man who made a movie called The 13th Day. It's on Fatima. He spent $1,500,000 of his own money, apparently. And he based it on a quotation. He thought he had it correct. Unfortunately, he didn't. The quotation was, Our Lady said, Lucy tells us that Lady said that Russia would spread her error in the singular. And since he assumed that the error by singular was communism, and since communism had been overturned in 1989, he based his whole presentation, and even though it doesn't show up in the actual text, it's suggested throughout the film that now we have the triumph of Our Lady. I pointed out to him that that's not quite true. I said that she said Our Lady said that Russia would spread her errors. And he said, well, where is that? I said, well, I'm in your store here, and I saw you had a book by Sister Lucy. Let's go and look it up ourselves. And I took his copy from his bookshelf and showed it to him. Our Lady said Russia would spread her errors. The poor man was quite upset. He would blame the messenger rather than the message, unfortunately. But at the end of the day, we got to get the message straight. The errors of Russia certainly are communism, but they're also Masonry, they're also Zionism, and that does not limit us to all the errors of Russia. And these errors, when Lucy talked to William Thomas Walsh in 1946, she was asked quite bluntly, as I said yesterday, in your opinion, do you think that the whole world will be overcome by communism? And Lucy answered yes. And Professor Walsh asked her again, because he was not certain that she'd understood the question. So he had his translator, Father Manuel Roca, ask the question again, and added the following, and does that include the United States of America? And Lucy again answered with one word, yes. Now, maybe to some it's not yet apparent that Lucy's prophecy of communism taking over the world is not yet apparent to you. To some of us it is. Without getting into all the politics of communism, is the theory whereby we give all our property to the state, who of course they hand it over to the elite who don't take credit for it, but who take your money and use it for themselves. Now there's a small family of people, maybe less than 1,000 people, who own billions, if not trillions of dollars. Well, people are starving around the world. God gave the world the property, as we know from the book of Scripture. First of all the world was given to mankind in common before original sin. But it's not meant, God does not mean for one family or one small group of people to own most of the wealth, where everyone else becomes their slave. Brother Hilaire Belloc wrote his book, a prophetic book. He wrote it in 1906 or 1908, called The Servile State. His thesis is very simple, that if the institution or if the holding of private property is in the hands of many, then we will be free. He says that economic freedom comes before political freedom, whereas if you don't have economic freedom, you will not have political freedom. Most people And he points out, he proves this both historically as well as just conceptually. And he gives the teaching that, first of all material wealth, not talking about spiritual wealth, but all material wealth is composed of three elements. Now, whether it's a watch or an airplane or a book, all these material elements, all these material wealth is composed of three elements. And those elements are as follows. You must have something that God made. Either it grows or it's in the ground somewhere. It's something that God made. That something that God made is secondly processed by human labor. And the third element for that material wealth is that it's processed with some sort of machine. It's true that we could just make it with the example, and to have machinery, you need to have savings. An example, you remember the story of Robinson Crusoe with his man Friday, where the two of them, all they had was themselves and nothing to eat. So they had to catch fish. Now, it's harder to catch fish with your bare hands than with some sort of instrument or machine. A machine doesn't have to be complicated, but making a net, for example, is a machine. The net makes it easier for a man to catch fish. So while one of them makes the net, the other one catches enough fish for both of them, so that the person catching fish for both of them is doing the function of saving. And by saving, then the other one could invest his time in making a net, and that way they could catch more fish. So machine savings are one element together that make, along with labor, along with all the natural resources. Now, if you can capture all the natural resources of the whole world with you and your few buddies, then everyone else becomes your slave. If you can capture all the natural resources and investments, then you have nothing to sell but your slavery, that's your labor, at their rates that they dictate to you. And so it's important to understand the concept. And in fact, historically, that has been the case. The institution of slavery, we're not talking about in the United States in the 19th century, we're talking about any time in human history, is that if you give all your wealth, and if everyone gives their wealth to the hands of a few, then we become their slaves. And it's important for us to realize that the way the world is going right now is that we'll become even more impoverished than we are up to now. Not only we, the whole world, except for the few elite, who in turn are in charge of the mystery of iniquity in the first place. And so why has this got to do with Fatima? Well, Our Lady foresaw all this. And you would think, certainly there's men who understand this as well. There are men who are good men who can understand this after many years of study. But Our Lady understood it and foresaw it and told us the solution. Now the problem with Fatima is that people think it's too simple, or they think it's only for children. There's nothing more serious and nothing more important for adults to grasp and to put into effect than the message of Our Lady of Fatima. So the devil knows that when Our Lady's plan, Our Lady's promised that in the end her Immaculate Heart will triumph, that the Holy Father will obey, and that Russia will be converted and a period of peace given to mankind. What is implicit in that promise is that the whole world will become Catholic, because we cannot implement the plan of peace, which comes from the Prince of Peace, which is Jesus Christ, unless, of course, we believe his doctrine, we accept his grace, and accept his authority. And, of course, you become a Catholic who knows your faith, who accepts the legitimate authority of church or state, but you don't let the authorities go beyond their jurisdiction if it's important for the common good. In fact, as was pointed out earlier today, I believe it was, we must obey God rather than men, as St. Peter, the first Pope, said. And so there needs to be a principle that is not understood, although it's, to me, very straightforward. St. Thomas, mind you, is the one who explains it better than I do, but very simply, the Church has, even the new Code of Canon Law, which I have had to spend tens of thousands of dollars learning and studying and defending myself with, in the new code itself, it points out that no one can be punished. Not a layperson or a priest or a bishop or a cardinal can be punished if they have not committed an ecclesiastical crime. So an ecclesiastical crime would be, for example, to say something heretical or to resist authority that is not being abused. But if the Pope, as St. Robert Bellarmine tells us, St. Robert Bellarmine is not only a saint, but a doctor of the Church, and not just a doctor of the Church, but in fact the doctor of the church that defends the rights of the papacy. So to quote St. Robert Bellarmine is perhaps the best one to quote here, or to cite him, which is that if a pope were to, and therefore goes for a bishop or a priest, of course, as well, or anyone else, if a pope were to attack someone in the body to cause them to sin with him, this is the example he gives. You have the right to resist him, even to strike him. Now, normally to strike the pope, you're excommunicated. But if he's attacking you, you have a right to resist him, even with physical force. But that's not the real point. The real point, he goes on to say, is that if that is true, and it is true, for the body, he says, is much more true for the soul. So if the Pope were to attack your faith, that you have a right to resist him, even with physical resistance, if it's necessary, or whatever it takes. He says you can do everything, but you cannot depose him. Your resistance must be proportional to the attack. You can't say, if somebody takes from you 5 cents that you hit him with a tax of $10 million. It's not proportional. But similarly, if the Pope were to attack your faith, and I think Suarez, another great doctor, theologian rather, of the church, and Torquemada, both of these men are recognized as leading theologians among the theologians, along with St. Thomas, along with Robert Bellarmine, point out that if the Pope were to change all the customs of the church, that he could be resisted and should be resisted. When you resist, whether it comes to the message of Fatima, when the Cardinal Secretary of State, that's Cardinal Casaroli, Cardinal Sodano, and Cardinal Bertoni, lie about the message of Fatima, we are told, it's our birthright, we have it as Catholics, the message of Fatima. It is ruled by the church as worthy of belief. They can't just say, you can't talk about this. I have never, by the way, received an order not to speak about Fatima. Never in my life, not from anybody. It's been suggested that I would voluntarily give it up more than once, but never have they given me an order. Because what I would do with that order is I'd first of all ask for it in writing, and then I would publish it, as I've done before. And then I'd point out why this order is illegal. But it's not just me. Anyone who knows a modicum of church law could do the same thing. Of course, the lay people, they don't bother with, for the most part. But if there's some sort of sense that you need to have some sort of acceptability, we are the mainstream of the church. We're a minority, we're a small minority, but we are the mainstream. They're the ones that are wrong. And I think we should not take the attitude, well, I'll do this and I'll cower in a corner somewhere and I'll be afraid, hoping that they won't notice what I'm doing. The real fact is that Our Lady came because she sees us in danger. We are in danger. And to me, the danger is more and more apparent every day. But maybe I'm the only one who sees it. I don't think so. But somehow or other, instead of dealing with the issue, they will point to someone like me and say, don't listen to him. Well, it's in your best interest to listen to the truth. If I'm making a mistake somewhere, I've yet to find one person make a question that we haven't answered, that we're not able to respond to. Pope Benedict XVI has a commission on Fatima. It's been formed, Bishop Fillet tells me, since February 2006. He told me that month when I was in Winona visiting. Since that time, an Indian bishop confirmed me. I says, I can affirm to you that that commission does exist. Yet, not one member of this commission has ever asked me a question. And yet, Cardinal Ratzinger, Pope Benedict XVI, knows me by name, knows my name, knows what I do. So, I would say he's a more serious pope in the sense that all the popes before him have not done that. The difference is he hasn't got a commission, apparently, worth its salt to ask the first questions or to answer the questions. Yet, I think that, so as somebody wrote to me recently, it's up to us to make our point to the Pope and the bishops. That is why making these video tapes to put on TV and make them as personal as possible, so people, you understand, we're not just a statistic. We're a real person. Each of us are, and we have a family and a history. And the non-consecration of Russia will affect you personally in ways that you yourself will recognize once you know the consequences of not doing it. Have him understand that you have the right, with all respect, to ask him to do his duty. St. Alphonsus tells us that a pastor of souls, a parish priest, has to, at risk of his life, give the last sacraments to a parishioner of his. If, for example, there's a deep ditch in one of his parishioners fallen down into this, and it could cave in any time. The pastor, under pain of mortal sin, has to go down there and hear his confession and give him last rites if he possibly can, including losing his life. That's the obligation of a pastor. If that's true for the local pastor of your local church, and St. Alphonsus is a doctor of the church of morality and morals, it's the same is true for your bishop, the same is true for your pope. They're all your pastors. And that is, you have a right to ask the Holy Father to say, Holy Father, save me, save my family, do the consecration. I'm not going to hold you not responsible before God on Judgment Day. God is your boss, I'm not, but I will not hold you not responsible for not doing your job. You have a right to say that. Just as you have a right to say, give us the third secret, give me the secret, publish it to the world, and you owe it to me as a Catholic parishioner, as a member of the Catholic Church. You have a right to say that to him. And if he doesn't like that, then you can say to him very simply, then give us a canonical statement, not your opinion. We want a canonical statement whereby you invoke your authority to say I'm wrong. What has happened with Fatima is what has happened with the Mass for all this time is they're running the church without taking responsibility for it. If there's a father of family who has 10 children, and this was his living room, and he tells half his sons to paint the room red, he tells the other half of the sons to paint the room green. What's going to happen when they get to meet each other? They're going to fight because they say, Dad wants it painted green. No, he wants it painted red. Well, that's what the popes have done until Benedict cleared it up, but even still, most people don't know it yet, is that when they said the old Mass was forbidden, and so some of us were considered disobedient or schismatic or whatever other titles they had for us because we said the old Mass or because we went to the old Mass. But the fact is that the law of the church, and as Father pointed out this morning, that not only the law of the church, but the dogma of the church, but the law of the church itself was not changed. But they gave the impression of changing it. They gave the impression of giving an order that everyone had to say the old Mass. But in fact, the law was never changed, as Benedict pointed out on the 7th of July, 2007, in a Summum Pontificum. That's one statement in there which is quite accurate. There is what is going on, the same thing with Fatima, is they pretend on the one side to make a ruling on it. They tell us that the whole secret is released. But you'll notice the Pope has never, no Pope, not John Paul II or anyone else, has ever said this is the truth. In fact, Benedict XVI has said quite the opposite, all but saying it as explicitly as I'm saying. Apparently, some of you don't know this, but in May of 2010, after our conference, our Fatima Challenge conference, in which we cross-examined, as John Salsa, myself, and Chris Ferrara cross-examined the co-author of the book by Bertoni, Cardinal Bertoni, we pretty well had him on the ropes. The book, this epilogue shows that he realized he was wrong, but he didn't admit it. But when he went to shake his hand, thanking him for coming, he didn't shake my hand. Instead, he embraced me and thanked me for all the work we're doing. So, unfortunately, the co-author of the book died 2 months later. But 1 week after that, the Pope, when he went to Fatima on the plane, was asked a question. Is the pedophilia scandal in the secret? And the Pope said, yes. Now, if you read the secret that they published, the part they did publish, it is nowhere to be found. It's in the other text, the text that we've proven exists. It's a text that you have a right to ask for. Our Lady didn't give it to the popes. On the letter itself, it says it's to be opened in 1960 by express order of the Blessed Virgin. We've proven that case over and over again, and Descartes came to defend his position. But in their book, for example, they talk about, Sister Lucy said, yes, these are my sheets. Sheets in plural, these are my sheets. Well, what they gave us was only one sheet. Of course, the way they photocopied it in the book in 2001, it looked like 4 sheets. But when he pulled it out on TV in 2007, it's only 1 sheet of paper. So where are the other sheets? At least one more. Of course, we know it is in the other envelope. When Cardinal Bertone was talking about these, he talked about these envelopes. He said, this is the authentic envelope, implying that the other envelope is not authentic. And so implying that the document that was, this is the authentic secret, implying the document in the other envelope wasn't authentic. He was asked directly the question, there are those who say that you've hidden the secret because the Blessed Virgin has pointed out that there's bad leadership from the Vatican. And Cardinal Bertone's answer is most instructive. He says, the Blessed Virgin Mary is the help of Christians. How could she possibly say that the Vatican is doing something wrong when she isn't the help of Christians? The rhetorical question is implying that she could never say such a thing. But the Holy Spirit in the Bible tells us in Acts 20, with St. Paul, with his sermon, with his talk to the clergy, the bishops and the priests of Ephesus, he says, after my departure from among your own number, meaning bishops and priests, there will rise certain people to lead the faithful away from following Christ. In the book of Jude, in the letter of Jude, it's a very short letter. In the first 4 verses, he talks about these false brethren entered in among us, again, to deceive the faithful. And it's the deception of the faithful that you need to be concerned with. You are a target to be deceived, to be lied to. You might say, why would they lie to me? Why would Catholic bishops, why would Cardinal Bertone lie to me? Well, maybe lying is too strong a word for some refined thinkers, but he is certainly deceiving you and knowing he's doing so. What they tell you is that he's using a mental reservation. You see, this other document, in his opinion, is not authentic because Our Lady criticizes what's going on in the Vatican, criticizes the Second Vatican Council explicitly, criticizes the change in the Mass explicitly, and criticizes that there's an apostasy going on led from the Vatican. How do we know these things? From the witnesses who have read this and have told us. There's certainly Cardinal Chappie, who was a great witness. Cardinal Chappie was a papal theologian, that is, the personal theologian to the Pope for 40 years, or almost 40 years, from 1958, in the time of Pius XII, John XXIII, Paul VI, John Paul I, and John Paul II, 5 popes. He died in 1996, Cardinal Chappie did. And before he died, he said, in the third secret is foretold, among other things, the great apostasy in the church begins at the top. That is what the secret's about. But they're hiding it from you so that you can't defend yourself. You might have heard because they want to keep their own program going on. Some of them are doing this because, as Sister Lucy said, they have diabolical disorientation. That is, they're discombobulated. They don't have their bearings anymore. And so they're confused. As Lucy talked about them the same way, they're blind and leaders of the blind, and both will fall into the pit. This is what we're having going on today. You need to, first of all, make sure that you take your own medicine to not be deceived, and that is, of course, the rosary. Our Lady tells us to pray the rosary every day. She says it will overcome heresy, decrease sin, and overcome vice. By praying the rosary, you're less likely to be deceived. And deception, our Lord tells us in times like ours, if those who think that the Antichrist is around the corner after World War III, and they may be right, then these are the times our Lord said that even the elect would be deceived if that were possible. And of course, it comes to the whole point of the truth. The truth is necessary. We must love the truth. We must seek the truth. We must defend the truth. Without the truth makes us free, and of course, the lie enslaves us. The devil's whole kingdom is based on a lie. Whether you take his kingdom in the material world, whether you take his kingdom in the spiritual world, it's always based on a lie. Someone was talking about Satan's kingdom and that they both acknowledge, the Satanists and Catholics acknowledge the existence of God and Satan. But one gives their allegiance to Satan, the other gives their allegiance to God. The difference is that the Satanists are following a lie. The devil has told them that he's equal to God. Of course, that's the biggest lie of all. And for these who are not thinking about these things, there are people who believe, who are the lukewarm, who don't care. The devil tells them he doesn't exist, and they believe that. Are we when we talk about these things like this, people ask us, they might say that we exaggerate. So I'd rather quote from Benedict XVI himself when he tells us that the very future of the world is at stake. That's a direct quote. If you wish to look it up, you can find it on his talk on December 20th, 2010 to the Roman Curia. The very future of the world is at stake. The very future of the world. That's the whole world. The Masons think, and the Zionists think, and the international bankers think that when they have their way, they will kill 6 billion, that's with a B. Out of 7 billion people living, they want to kill 6,500,000,000, leaving just a simple 500 million left, of course, and they will be the masters. Those who are not of their league will become their slaves and become their foot soldiers and so forth, their servants. But they want to kill 6 billion of us, 6,500,000,000 more exactly. That, of course, is on the monument in Alberton, Georgia, and that monument has been there since '82. That is their intention. That is their intention, as you might not know, in the French Revolution, Robespierre, after he was finally executed himself, there were found papers among his papers that he wanted to have killed, guillotined 10 million Frenchmen, almost half or more of the population of France at the time. It's hard for us to believe these things because we don't think this way. But you might as well, against a fact, there's no argument, as St. Thomas tells us. We have to use the rigorous rules of logic. A fact is a fact. Some argument, oh, that couldn't be, doesn't stand. If you have a monument, if you want to see it for yourself, you can go there. If you want to see a picture of it, you can see it in the book Fatima Priest at the back. If you want to see it if you want to have a great description of it, you can see it on our website. No one has denied this. I've said this many times. They are calling for the extermination of everybody in this room and a lot more besides. The very future of the world is in danger, is at stake, more exactly, not just in danger, is at stake. Let's just go on a little bit more with what the Pope says. He compares the present civilization of the world to the fall of the Roman Empire. Here's what he has to say. The sun was setting over an entire world. Frequent natural disasters further increased the sense of insecurity. There was no power in sight that could put a stop to this decline. And the Pope Benedict compares our present day to that time that the whole world changed before the fall of the Roman Empire. Benedict went on to warn, moral consensus is collapsing, consensus without which juridical and political structures cannot function. Consequently, the forces mobilized for the defense of such structures seem doomed to failure. That's Benedict speaking just before Christmas in 2010, less than 2 years ago. There is one answer and only one answer. I happen to read the financial papers because I took 5 years of economics, and these papers don't always tell you the truth, but they're more inclined to tell you the truth than the general newspapers because their clientele loses lots of money if they don't tell them the truth sometimes. And then they would not have them. These guys have been going for 30 years or more. The Great Financial Cliff of 2012-13, Part 1. This is a video that Martin Weiss put on. He gives you 5 reasons why he thinks that the US dollar will collapse before the end of next year and quite possibly before the end of this year. He's not the only one. Porter Stansberry, I don't have his booklet with me, he's been spending millions of dollars, at least $2 million, warning the world of the imminent collapse of the US dollar. Both of these men have been in this business reporting on financial matters for a long, long time. They're not the only ones. The collapse, when people begun to realize that the US dollar and every other dollar and euro and everything else is worth nothing, people will not be able to give those dollars away at the store to buy your milk. It's not that far off. I could be wrong on the timing. Certainly the event itself is heading in that direction, and I don't think anyone serious who studied this can say otherwise. There is an answer to that. There's an answer to the saber rattling that continues to go on over Iran and Israel. I just saw in the paper yesterday, I think it's the Prime Minister of Israel, saying we've got to stop Iran now, otherwise they're going to get the bomb. Of course, here's Israel saying this, and they have the nuclear warhead themselves. And they have it pointed at 5 capitals of the world, one of them being Washington, one being London, one being Rome, one being Moscow, with the the Samson option, that if they don't have their way, they'll bring the world down with them. That is in a book written by a Jew who used to work for the Mossad. You can read it for yourself. The kind of stupid thinking that passes for intelligence that these people have, they're so blinded by their pride but it's just amazing to see the hypocrisy of this, that he's saying, if Iran gets the bomb, and what about your bomb that you got pointed at us right now? They're the 4th largest nuclear force in the world. They have at least 400 bombs on missiles. These are published facts. You have to look for them, but they're not that hidden. If you need to have these things explained further, I don't mind explaining them as much as I can. I'm not an expert in these things. At the same time, I still hear people thinking that the United States is the most powerful military force in the world. I could be wrong, but I do know the Chinese proved it to the Navy of the United States a few years ago that they're not that secure. When the Kitty Hawk aircraft carrier was going from Asia to the Middle East, up popped within 5 miles a Chinese sub, of all things, basically saying, by showing their flag, we're within 5 miles, and we all know what that means. We could have we could have sent a torpedo against you now, and you have no defense against it. We're too close. It's never been talked about in the papers over here, but the U.S. military knows about it. It's not the only thing. Why is that important? Because the extension of the U.S. police force around the world, it depends on their aircraft carriers. The military principle, the height has more power. He was the heights. Therefore, the airplane gives you that. But the airplanes need a place to land. They can't land anywhere. They need aircraft carriers to do it in some places. If you take the aircraft carriers out, you take out their extension of the airplanes. There's so much going on, and it's so obvious that we have our backs to the wall. Some people have said I'm courageous for standing up. It's not courage. I'll tell you, it's foresight. Our backs are to the wall, and we're going to be slaughtered unless we listen to Our Lady of Fatima before it's too late. That's all there is to it. But it's not enough for me to be convinced of it. It's enough that enough people get on their knees and say their rosary and do their 5 First Saturdays. And yes, write a letter to the Pope, say something to the Pope, send him an email, whatever way you can communicate to him, and tell your friends and neighbors. So they're afraid. The enemies of the Satan and his cohorts in the world are afraid of Our Lady of Fatima. And therefore they have to stop this. So how do they stop this? They have a technique for stopping this, and they've been quite successful, unfortunately for all of us, up to now. The first technique is to not talk about Fatima. So there's a whole generation. I was talking to someone today or yesterday who said, when I was in school, back in the 40s, I was taught by my teachers about Fatima. And I can remember myself when I was about in the early 1950s, same thing happened to me. But I can tell you since 1960, if your children are going to regular schools, or should we say the diocesan Catholic schools, I would bet that they haven't heard about Fatima from their students, from their teachers. You don't hear it in the pulpits. I remember a man that used to work for me, he was about 25 or 30 years old. He'd been out of high school about 5 or 7 years by that time. He met one of his old high school buddies, and the guy asked him, where do you work? He said, I work at Fatima Center. He says, Fatima, what's that? So this is a fellow Catholic he went to school with. And he said, well, Fatima, Our Lady appeared at Fatima and gave a message. Oh, that didn't happen. Oh, yes, it did. Well, I went to Catholic grade school, Catholic high school. I never heard of it. So at least this guy had enough honesty to go back home and ask his mother. His mother did remember hearing about Fatima. But that person is typical of the last 2 generations. Since 1960, they have not heard of Fatima. But somehow or other, some people, after all, we've spent millions of dollars raised from people only to put it out there again on the TV, on the radio, on publishing, on the internet, whatever we can get the word out there. We've sent out the booklet, True Story of Fatima. I think we're reaching now 1 million copies. It's already about close to 3.5 or 4 million copies of it. We spent out about 1 million or more copies ourselves. Of course, all this costs money, but we at least are able to stop the silence from completely burying Fatima. But one of the other techniques is when you get to hear about Fatima, then the lies start. Well, you know, Fatima, the consecration's been done. Well, who's the chief liar on that? Well, that's Cardinal Bertone. This is currently the most powerful man in the church, perhaps even more powerful than the Pope, because he's the Secretary of State. I remember when I sent my letter to the personal secretary, I knew Father McGee years ago, and when I was being attacked in 81 for the simple reason for promoting Fatima, I wrote a letter to the Pope. It was a long letter, it was very poorly written, very poorly typed, but anyway, it was the best I could do. I had one secretary and myself, and not much experience. Anyway, I got the letter to Father McGee, and Father McGee read it to the Pope when he was in the hospital in June and July of 81. I asked him what he did with the letter. He said, I didn't read it all. He said, it's too long, but I read a lot of it. He said, what happened to the letter? He said, I gave it to the Secretary of State. I said, what did you do that for? He says, well, he's my boss. Here's the Pope's own personal secretary is subject to the rule of the Cardinal Secretary of State. Every employee, not just the papal nuncios, every employee is employed by the Secretary of State. So he has more day-to-day power, more day-to-day control than anybody, including the Pope. And he's the one that's been designated to stop Fatima as much as he can. So it's no wonder that it's the Secretaries of State that are the ones who are opposing Fatima, because Fatima is opposed to the devil. Fatima is opposed to Masonry, it's opposed to Zionism, it's opposed to communism, it's opposed to all these false fronts of Our Lady. And the devil knows, even though the popes don't seem to know, that when Our Lady's message of Fatima is met and put in place, then we will have peace and the devil's kingdom will be over. Even the financial stronghold the devil has over finance today will be over. I think it's great that a medical doctor, I've known a number of them myself, both my grandfathers and my brother were doctors, but this medical doctor understands something about finance. It's unusual, let me tell you. Anyway, in his book, Russian Sunrise, he explains exactly how Russia will be used to put an end to the devil's stranglehold over finance. It's a very interesting, very simple. It's a novel, but it's not just a novel. It's based on the message of Fatima, and although some of the details he had to make up in his imagination, he points out how one scenario, how the consecration will take place and what will happen as a result of that, and why consecrating Russia will be able to overcome the devil's plans. If you think of consecration is both an exorcism, but it's also a blessing. And the blessing part of it you need to understand. King David in the Old Testament was consecrated secretly by the prophet. God sent the prophet to Jesse and his 8 sons. And the prophet went and asked Jesse to bring his sons to him. Jesse brought 7 of his sons. And the prophet met the oldest one first, said, no, not this one. Second one, no, not this one. Third one, not this one. All 7. Do you have any more sons, he asked him. He said, yes, I have one more. He's back taking care of the sheep. Bring him here. The prophet recognized him as the one to be consecrated. So first of all, I wanted to point out that the consecration is specific. It's a specific consecration that David received. The oil of consecration was not poured on his brother's head, only on his. Secondly, what happened after that? David, after that, he didn't foolishly go and put himself in danger, but when his sheep were being attacked, he killed a bear single-handedly. Now, most men wouldn't do that. David was not hurt. He also killed a lion the same way, single-handedly. Now, these stories are important because they're true, but they're important because when a Goliath came along and blasphemed God and said, is there not a man in Israel that can take me on in hand-to-hand battle for 40 days and 40 nights? Not one soldier, and they must have had some good men, not one of them would take on this battle. This man was a giant. David came forward and said, I will take him on. Now, David was about 18 years old at the time. And he was slight build. I'm sure he grew more after that. But the armor they wanted to put on him was too cumbersome. He couldn't carry it. He said, I will go in without any armor. I don't need it. And so he took on a giant of a man all by himself and won. Now, why could he do that? Because he had been consecrated. He had special protection. So the mystery of iniquity that has conspired for centuries, that's coming together in our time, in our generation, and they think they've won, and they most likely have, unless we implement Our Lady's Fatima's plan first. They think they've won because they pretty well have got all the strongholds in every field, not just finance, not just military, every field. In the Vatican itself, as Father Creamer's good friend, Father Mario Marini, pointed out, that the Masons are in control of every dicastery at the critical points in the Vatican. We are surrounded. We cannot do it ourselves. When Our Lady says, only I can help you, she means it literally. Only she can help us. Therefore, what are the tricks to stop us from implementing this plan? It's very simple. I can answer these questions for hours and go into, we've published books, tens of thousands of pages, no doubt, somewhere along the way. But at the end of the day, it's very simple, is what I'm telling you. We've answered the objections because they keep raising them up. But the truth itself is very simple, which is that God foresaw this from all eternity. We did not choose to be born at this time, but God has given us a way out. But we have to take it God's way. If we implement God's plan, we will be not only spiritually, but physically saved. But if we refuse to take God's plan, then what befalls us is our own fault. If I could speak to a larger audience to make this understood, if I could answer any question, I would try to do that. But at the end of the day, all of you have to pass the word on. So the first level is to learn this as much as you can. If you can't explain it, at least tell them. If they can't have the explanation, ask them to write to us or phone us, and we'll give them the answer. The answers are very simple. And at the end of the day, people would say, well, who are you? You're just a Catholic priest, and there's Cardinal Bertone. He's, after all, the Secretary of State. Very simply, examine the facts. For the statement that Cardinal Bertone tells us that the consecration is done, very simply, look at his evidence. His evidence is a letter dated the 8th of November, 1989. That letter is addressed to Mr. Walter Nelliker. Now, he doesn't do us the courtesy of telling us who it's addressed to, but I happen to have that letter in my copy of it in my files for the last, and Bob has put it in his book as well, the letter, and I expect the answer as well. But you find this one of 5 letters. Father Creamer is the recipient of Father Creamer himself wrote to Sister Lucy and got one of these other fake letters. There are 5 of them between August of 1989 and July of 1990. All allegedly signed by Sister Lucy. Well, it so happens that those letters have all been proven to be fakes many years ago. Frère Francois, we published much of this material that they published. We also gave our own proofs, but Frère Francois was a writer in that time on Fatima, and he went to the meeting of the bishops' meeting on Fatima in 2000, in October 2000. And I think it was certainly around the 11th to the 13th, one of those days. It's in these books, you can tell you the day. He confronted Father Fox and Father Condor, and he said something like the following. He was at a Congress, and at the question period, he went to the stage, and he went to the microphone and said, you, Father Fox, and you, Father Condor, are the authors of these fake letters. I have proven it in my writings. I am prepared to take your challenge against what I say, and I will give you an apology if you prove it. Father Condor and Father Fox stood up, walked off the stage, and never said a word. The next day, Frère Francois met Father Monsignor Guerra, the rector of the shrine. He also accused him of being an author of this letter. Not Sister Lucy, but you, Father Guerra, have made these letters up. Can you swear in the Bible that you did not write these? Father Guerra answered, I cannot. I will not answer. And that's all he said. He repeated himself several times, other than to say, you have no heart. Those letters have been discredited 10 years before Cardinal Bertoni even cited them. And that's the only proof he gives for this statement that the consecration has been done. It's pitiful. It seems that when we attacked him, Cardinal Bertoni, on the third secret in 2000, when he came out in 2000 and said that this is the whole secret. Now, I'm summarizing 32 pages into a couple of words. In the booklet called The Message, given on June 26, Cardinal Bertoni said, he quoted Sister Lucy, among other things, saying, Lucy said, yes, these are my sheets. So out of his own mouth, 10 years later when he gave us, or 7 years later when he gave us the one sheet, I said, where's the other sheets? He's never answered that. And we asked that, of course, of Giuseppe Di Carli, his co-author. You know, it's in the books again, but their proof, their evidence, their statements are so bogus and proven out of their own mouths time and time again. So it's not about whether I'm important or not important. In fact, the nuncio to this country, who died not so long ago, but Archbishop Sambi got into a discussion with the editor of Inside the Vatican. And at a certain point, Archbishop Sambi, the papal nuncio in Washington, talking to Robert Moynihan, gets up and he says, Sambi said, excuse me. He got up and went out of the room and came back with a book. Here he said, read this. You should read it. It was Christopher Ferrara's book, The Secret Still Hidden. Wait, I said, says Moynihan, wait. You're the Pope's representative in the U.S., and you're urging me to read a book that questions what the Secretary of State wrote? Somebody replied, all I'm saying is that there are interesting things worth reading in this book. And in the end, we're all after the truth, aren't we? The truth is the important thing. There's Archbishop Sambi saying, you should read the book by Chris Ferrara, The Secret Still Hidden. Sambi's first boss is, of course, Cardinal Bertoni. And in Chris's book, he's obviously saying, Bertoni is not telling us the truth, the whole truth. He's deceiving us. You can read it for yourself. We published it in 5 different languages and sent it to all the bishops of the world, as well as to many priests. But I can say from so far, after some other professions, or maybe before other professions, the priests seem to have the least amount of risk possibility they will endure. Whatever, they have risk aversion. They don't want any risk. So it's bad to say these things. You, of course, might have somebody write a letter and say you're suspended, like they've done to me. But the difference is that if you know the law, their suspensions, first of all, are not valid for the simple reason to tell the truth is never a crime. To defend Our Lady of Fatima is never a crime. To point out that if you want to save your souls and save millions of souls, the supreme law of the Church itself, Canon 1752, is the supreme law of the Church is the salvation of souls. So nowhere from the day one to the present has any pope, cardinal, bishop, or priest, or anybody else ever told me you cannot speak about the message of Fatima. They would be fools to do so. They've tried to stop me many other ways. I can tell you the story of the gentleman. It was Cardinal he was then Archbishop Grodzielewski. He's now in charge of Catholic education, of all things. But we had succeeded, Chris and I, in getting rid of the man in charge of the Signatura. That is it was Cardinal. His name he was a Swiss cardinal. He had worked for Cardinal Ottaviani, and he succeeded in becoming a cardinal, I think, after he died. Ottaviani, I don't think would recommend him. But all I'm getting at is that he had written against me and proven that he was prejudiced in my case. So we wrote a letter to the court saying he must recuse himself. He cannot be the judge of my case since he's already obviously prejudiced. Of course, they covered themselves by 3 days before our letter was sent in. He recused himself voluntarily. So anyway, so the new man that came in was Grodzielewski. And Grodzielewski was the second in command, the secretary of the Congregation of the Signatura. Signatura is the Supreme Court for these cases in the church. So there's only 16 lawyers that can take your case in this. So there's 400,000 priests. One way of stopping is just to have you can't get a lawyer. And the first thing I've had more lawyers betray me, than on this case. Anyway, so I was looking for a new lawyer. So what do? I find this this Italian lawyer who's not only, he doesn't get all his income from church court cases, he's also appeals on the Italian Supreme Court. So I went to visit him. And so he wouldn't take my case away. I said, I've got to make some inquiries. So I came to see him a week later, or 3 or 4 days later, whatever it was. He said, I'm not going to take your case. But he said, well, I said, why not? He said, well, I spoke to Archbishop Grodzielowski, the de facto judge in my case, and he asked him, should he take the case? And he said, this case is not about Father Gruner's incarnation. Now, that's what it technically was. That's all it was about, incarnation, etc., okay? It's about what Father Gruner says. Here you have a judge of the Supreme Court of the Catholic Church telling us that although this case is about whether or not this incarnation should go through or whatever it was about, he's saying it has nothing to do with that at all. It's all about what he says. But they dare not say that out in open. The only witness to that, of course, is the Ligi, was his name, Franco Ligi, who told me about it. So I'm getting at it, that there is skullduggery going on in the Vatican to stop Fatima. It's as simple as that. Why do they do that? Because we are telling the truth, and they have no answer to what we're telling the truth. But their answer to do this is to have people come up and say, we love Our Lady. We are friends of Our Lady. We love the Blessed Virgin's message. And then falsify it. That's what this book is about, False Friends of Fatima. It starts off with Cardinal Bertoni, who poses as a friend. And if you look at the picture, perhaps it tells it all. You have Judas giving a kiss to Christ. And these false friends are like Judas. They give an external sign of devotion while betraying him with the very same gesture. This is what the false friends of Fatima are doing. So you've got to distinguish between the true ones and the false ones. The book, I think, makes its case very well. It goes on not only talking about Cardinal Bertoni, not only talking about the Wanderer newspaper magazine, not only talking about the Blue Army, not only talking about who are some of these other ones? This, Cardinal Sardano, and it goes straight through everybody. And in case we couldn't fit it all in, we then have 5 pages of referred writing over the last 20 years or more, proving these various cases. You got Father Kramer in here, you got Christopher Ayers Moore writing, and you got some other ones as well. At the end of it, you also have a book that we didn't publish, and we don't publish, but is by Father Florida, a Jesuit, who points out, he's got a thick book on the Vatican-Moscow agreement. The Vatican and the Moscow. The fact that the Church, that the Vatican has made a deal since 1962. I have not seen the text of it, but there's proof of it, which is good enough. First of all, you have the Catholic press in France acknowledging that it took place. You have the communist press acknowledging that it took place. It's never been denied. And what the deal was, you see carried out before your eyes for the last 45 years. And what is the deal? To maintain silence about communism. But Our Lady came to warn us about the errors, including communism. But Russia, the Vatican, made a deal not to speak about it. More exactly, the Secretariat of State. So how is this a betrayal? I remember meeting the Bishop of Ogdensburg, who had said some nasty things about me, and I went to see him personally. And so he pulled out a Fatima Crusader magazine, I think it was issue 17, and the title said something like this: in our time, the Vatican-Moscow agreement betrays us, something like that. Did you write that? I said, yes. Well then, case closed. I said, it's a fact. What's wrong with it? He said, well, I got a doctorate. I said, I've got one too. So tell me what's wrong with what I just said. He couldn't. But the point is, you need to realize that you are a target for lying to. The elect will be deceived if that were possible. The answer is the message of Fatima. There is no second answer. There are people who believe that Medjugorje is the continuation of Fatima, and therefore should look there for a solution. No. Our Lady gave us the message of Fatima. Besides the fact that Medjugorje is questionable at the best, and it says some heretical things, it's certainly not approved by the Church. And even if it were approved by the Church, it wouldn't make any difference. The message, Our Lady says, if my requests, meaning the requests she makes at Fatima, are fulfilled, there will be peace, and many souls will be saved. If not, various nations will be annihilated, the world will suffer famine, war, persecution of the Church, and persecution of the Holy Father. We deceive ourselves if we follow Cardinal Bertoni and his other blind and leaders of the blind. we need to be a little bit more proactive. You have a right to write your Pope. You have a right to insist that just as I could insist with my lawyer, you must be at that meeting. I hired you for that. You accepted it. It's a client relationship. Same way, Holy Father, you accepted this job. Either resign or do your duty. There's no third alternative. You have a right to say those things. Certainly say them respectfully. If my words are not respectful enough, I'm not trying to be disrespectful. Find the right words, but give the substance of the message. That's all I'm trying to tell you. It's important for your own sake, for your children's sake, for your country's sake. There is no other solution. All the other solutions we've had are all man-made solutions. They're all most likely Masonically. Most likely they're Masonically inspired from the beginning. Theodore Pike, the author of Morals and Dogma, the Masonic book, which calls for 3 world wars. We've had 2 of them at the Masonic bidding. We have the 3rd one brewing, and it's Masonically inspired. Even Hollywood gets it. On the inside of the wall that Mr. Bush, the Bushes I should say, as well as Kerry in the, what's the name of that place, the Skull and Bones Society, on their wall inside their secret tomb that they talk about on Yale property, their motto is one word. It's called war. They want war. War is what they want. They want to enslave us. The Masons have asked for that they dominate the world. And they've had this plan since 1730 in their published writings. Again, Father Kramer could answer these questions more. He spent his life reading much of their stuff. But that's what we're up against. But we have someone who will help us, but we have to do it her way. If you feel that you can do nothing else, you can do what the children of Fatima did. At very least is pray your rosary, offer the sufferings that God sends you every day. But remember, their greatest suffering came when they were asked to deny Fatima. They were asked to deny the truth of what they knew. Rather than deny that they were seeing her, and rather than revealing the secret, because our Lord told them not to do so yet, they would rather die by being boiled in oil. Dr. Anowski, who lives not far from you here, in his latest issue of The Crusader, has an article showing what heroic charity they had, what heroic virtue they had in resisting the powers of the world, even to the point of threats of death by being boiled in oil. But let us do our part, let us do what we can, and all of us, I'm sure, can do more than we're doing now. God bless you, and thank you.
I have come to warn the faithful to amend their lives and ask pardon for their sins. They must not continue to offend our Lord, who is already deeply offended.